Have you ever walked away from a conversation with a family member or friend feeling a little frustrated and maybe even irritated because they were talking down to you or giving you unsolicited advice? I've felt that way. What can you do about it?
Oh, look at that. Holy crap. That's okay, I'm starting here. Gonna climb, do all these switchbacks all the way up, catch this trail, the North Lichen Trail, and then come down here, and then I'm gonna just come down one of these streets and walk back. So that's what I'm doing. About 3.5 miles.
Sometimes when your conversations fall apart, it's not because of the words you use. Sometimes it's where you're coming from. Dr. Eric Berne wrote a book, Games People Play, in 1964. And in it, he introduces his readers to transactional analysis. When we talk to people, we're talking from one of 3 ego states: parent, adult, and child. I'll share a little clip from a video that he made about this.
In the 3 ego states, these roles that we all play constantly, are they present in all of us all of the time?
Yes, they are, except I want to take exception to your use of the word roles, because these are not roles. These are psychological realities. A role is sort of an artificial thing, not straight. These are not roles. They are actual people in your head. Anyway, in answer to your question, they are there all the time. Usually only one of them is active at a given time, and the others are kind of out of commission until something puts them back into commission.
Maybe there are people in your life, your friends, a friend, an employer, partner, that oftentimes you find yourself getting somewhat annoyed with them. And that's what this video is about. How do you fix that? And I'm going to utilize a system of communication called transactional analysis. And excuse me, the philosophy is that it isn't the words you use. Basically, it's where you're coming from when you speak to people. And I'm going to share 2 different aspects of transactional analysis. One is the ego states, and the other one is the life positions. And I think that these will help dramatically change the way you communicate.
I've introduced the idea of ego states in this video, and maybe it's time to talk a little bit about what is an ego state. Eric Berne in that earlier video spoke of them as people living within us, and I see that I see them maybe like characters living within us. They're not playing a role, but they are actually characters that live within us, and that we are acting out those certain characters in certain situations. So at times we are acting out the parent. We are being their parent. We are acting as if we're their parent. At times we're acting as if we're a child, which means generally that we're not taking responsibility for ourselves. We're blaming other people. There's that emotional instability with that child ego state. But with the adult, that adult ego state is rational, reasonable, wanting to solve problems, isn't taking things personal, isn't talking down to people. That's the adult ego state, and that's the adult character. And I think Eric Berne would say that that's the character that we need to strengthen. So how do we handle these 2 other ego states? Well, we focus on that inner ego state, and we'll talk a little bit about that as I go farther on into this video. So I hope that helps a little bit, understanding that these ego states are really characters that are living in us that we are acting out in different situations?
I learned this system about 30 years ago, and I use it every day, all the time, with my family, my friends, my partner, people that work for me, people that I work with. And I can tell you, I think people appreciate it. And I hope they don't find me annoying when I'm around them because of that. And so stay with me. We're going to look first at the ego states. And simply put, those are the parent, adult, and child from which we are speaking from. And I'll talk about them in depth. So stay with me. And by the way, I'm out hiking in Palm Springs. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous place. I was really surprised just how beautiful this place is. I was hiking up in this mountain area here. So I'm headed down. Anyway, gorgeous place. So what is the parent ego state? Well, the parent ego state is when you sound like a parent. Now, that could be good. You can be very nurturing especially when you're interacting with your children, your younger children. That's coming from a parent ego state. But the more you use that parent ego state with other adults, I'm guessing that's why they are annoyed with you, and I'm guessing that's why you get annoyed with people. It's the parent and the child. We'll talk about the child next. But the parent ego state, when you're speaking like a parent, it's typically somewhat critical, and you're using the word should or the words you need to. So think about your communication with people. I get it. There's going to be times that you have to sound like that. But, when you're talking to your spouse or your partner, you don't need to be using the word need. See, I'm using the word need now. But you shouldn't, and using the word should here. So there are appropriate times to use that. But when I'm talking to my partner, I'm not her parent. And the more that I sound like her parent, it's not good. I don't think anybody wants anybody to talk to them like a parent. So look at your communication with people, especially your partner, and then especially with your older teenager, because no teenager wants to be parented the way that they were parented when they were 12. Now, I'll talk about that in a bit. But so if you're not getting the kind of response from your partner that you want, maybe it's because you're coming to them in that parent ego state with that parent tone. So think about that just for a bit, and we'll go on to the parent and to the child now. Good aspects of the child ego state, but if you're coming from that ego state, and you're playful, that's the child ego state. Who doesn't want their partner to be playful? Maybe not all the time. There's got to be a serious time. There's a guy that I know, and the criticism that he gets a lot is that he's never serious. Maybe that is the perpetual child ego state. People get stuck in that. You get stuck in an ego state. So the child ego state is typically, when it's more of a negative aspect of it, it is rather emotional, not rational, very egocentric. This sounds like a child. It's your fault. It's your you're to blame, and you don't take any responsibility for maybe what's going on in your life. Let me give you a very quick example. Let me stop this, and then let me give you a very quick example of how the parent and the child ego states kind of get caught up into this somewhat annoying cycle.
I want to talk a little bit about that dance that goes on between the ego states, especially the parent ego state and the child ego state. I want to tell a story about how sometimes that explains how sometimes they trigger one another. So imagine a woman who works downtown and in an urban setting, and she wants to go have lunch with her friends, but it's just downpour. So she calls her husband and she says, "Hey, is there a chance that you could bring me my umbrella today?" And he says, "Well, sure, I'll bring it to you." Well, then the same thing happens the next day. And, "Hey, it's raining down here. Is there any chance that maybe you could bring me my umbrella?" He says, "Well, yeah." And then he rearranges his schedule, and, he has to take care of things so that he can get it down to her. Well, then it happens a third day. And he's probably a little annoyed about it. And in his mind, she's in that child character, that child ego state. She's not taking responsibility for herself. And so what does that do? That triggers that parental ego state. And so he goes down to her and says, "Here's your umbrella, but you need to remember to bring your umbrella. Take some responsibility for yourself. Act like an adult." I mean, he could say a lot of different things. And she's likely then to come out of that child ego state and say, you know how many times I've helped you, and I've done this for you, and I've done that for you, and I've picked up your clothes, and I've made you dinner, and I've prepared your lunches, and on and on and on. And so it's just a dance. It's that conflict that arises when one ego state is dancing with the other ego state. And so instead of coming at her in the parent ego state, imagine him coming to her in that adult ego state. And in the adult ego state, he comes to her and says, "Sweetheart, I've noticed that you've forgotten to bring your umbrella the last couple of days. Is there something I can do to help maybe remind you tomorrow to bring it?" And so he's shifted into a completely different mode, that instead of being a parent telling her what he needs to do, he's there to help support her and help solve the problem. That's what happens when you move into the parent ego state. You're solving a problem. You're using reason, rationality. And so her response, doesn't that feel better? And her response is, I think what I'm going to do, I don't think I need your help, but I think what I'm going to do is maybe put a little sticky note by the door pointing down to the umbrella, say, "Hey, don't forget your umbrella." And I'll probably check the forecast tomorrow just to make sure. The problem gets solved without one or the other people entering to a parental mode, the parent state or the child state. And so that indicates a little bit about how one ego state can trigger the other. But the same thing is true for an adult ego state triggering an adult ego state. And so that's why in this video, we've talked a little bit about strengthening the adult ego state, which is reason and rationality, empathy, and putting your head together, putting your thoughts together and putting your heads together and solving the problem. So stay with me. In the earlier story, there is this transaction between two people, a message and a response. And sometimes those messages are unspoken. So I read into my wife's behavior as child behavior coming from her child ego state or her child character. And so it evoked in me that parent character or parent ego state. And so there's this dance between two people, I think, as I've explained. So how do you short circuit that, or how do you get back on track? And the way that you do that is by strengthening your adult character or ego state. You start reading from an adult script. And
as I did it in the second example, I approached her with, hey, I've noticed. There's no blaming. There's no accusations. You've just noticed something that you've forgotten your umbrella. That's what the adult does. The adult gathers information. The adult is looking to solve the problem. There's no blaming going on. And then when you speak from the adult character or ego state, oftentimes, and more often than not, it will evoke the adult ego state or character in the other person. So strengthening that adult character or ego strength or ego state is how we fix or correct those bad dances between the characters, that bad acting between the characters, that bad interaction between the characters, is we strengthen the adult ego state and we approach them not with the ego state that might have been triggered. So in this case, it was my parent ego state. So think about how you interact with people, and you might feel yourself drawn into using the word should or ought, or you need to, realizing that that's your parent ego state, and gathering information, asking questions, and then responding in an empathetic way is the way that we solve this communication between competing ego states. What's the point of knowing what the ego states are? It's to look at yourself and to look at the other people that you're communicating with, and then to ask yourself, geez, why am I so irritated when they call or when they talk or when we're having a conversation? And even the questions that they ask, why are you doing that? It's implied that you shouldn't be doing that. And it goes a little bit along with my advice that you shouldn't give unsolicited advice. So I know that sounds contradictory, me giving advice, but I feel like this is good general advice for living. Do not give unsolicited advice. And when you're in that parent ego state, you are. Let me say one more thing. When you're talking with your teenager, you have to be able to supervise them, of course, but you have to do it without sounding like a supervisor. Or you need to be a parent and not necessarily parent them all the time, especially when they get older, your older adult children. So I think it's very, very important to talk to people from that adult ego state, even your children. And when you're talking out of your parent ego state to your older teenager, just let them know, look, I know this is going to sound a little bit like me being your parent, but here's what my thoughts are. That still sounds like an adult, doesn't it? You need to do this, you should do that. So, very, very important that you understand what ego state, your communication patterns, these are patterns that you develop, and why they are important. So, because you will drive people crazy and they will drive you crazy if you stay in that parent ego state. And the same thing was true for a teenager. I'll tell a teenager, you wonder why your parent always sounds like they're parenting you? Maybe you need to look at what you're doing, because, communication is more than just words, right? Are you doing things that are saying to your parent inadvertently, they're saying, parent me, parent me, parent me. I see it all the time. I work with teenagers a lot, and I see it all the time. That and it just drives teenagers crazy when they hear their parents sound like a parent, especially when they get into 16, 17, middle adolescence. So, look at your communication patterns with your partner, with your teenagers, and with your employees. And when you talk about talking with your employees, it's there's a whole bag of tricks and trades that you can do when you're talking to a subordinate or somebody that works for you. So I think I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm going to talk about the life positions in another video because they're important too. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This stuff is super important when it comes to communicating. And if you do it right, you're going to avoid a lot of struggles in your communication with your partner, with your teenager, and with those that work for you and with you. All right, take care and happy trails.